started last week with Imam Malik, and before going into the story of Imam Malik, we went into a discussion on the importance of following the Sunnah. And you will recall that, essentially, the Prophet ﷺ came with two things. One was the book that was revealed to him, and the second was himself as an embodiment of how to live that book, kind of a shining example, you might say, of that book in action, and that's what we call the Sunnah as a concept. That's the Sunnah. And there are so many ayat of the Quran talking about this. There's that verse in Surah Al Imran that say, if you love Allah, then follow me, as in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah will love you and forgive you your sins, for Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. And there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said that all of my followers will enter paradise except those who refuse to go. And they said, oh, Ya Rasulullah, who will refuse? And he said, whoever obeys me will enter paradise, and whoever disobeys me is the one who refuses to enter it. So there's something obviously in the actual teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as the model that he espouses. Then you can be led into difficulties, because sometimes some hadith are a little bit confusing, and they can be confusing to the point where you look at it and you think, it doesn't make sense. I can't understand this as being the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. This isn't the way that we expect ourselves to conduct ourselves. And you kind of sometimes hope, oh, maybe it's not an authentic hadith, maybe someone made it up or something. And then you find that the hadith is in Bukhari or Muslim. So you have an example here of a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Do not initiate greetings with Jews and Christians, and when you meet any of them in the road, push them to its narrowest path." And that just doesn't seem to correlate with what we understand the Sunnah to mean. So it makes you then wonder, and it's not just that alone. There are many individual solitary hadith which sometimes really stand alone, as in there aren't many hadith like that. There's just one or two, but if you look at the chains, they're authentic, but they don't seem to tie in with what you would understand the message and the way of life that the Prophet ﷺ wants us to live as being. So Imam Malik, for instance, had a particular understanding of what the Sunnah ought to be, and it was not exactly just hadith. And you recall we talked about that. So the question then is, well, okay, what is the Sunnah? Is it following literally the hadith? Is it following a kind of broader example of the life of the Prophet ﷺ? Or is it that you can bunch hadith together to distill out certain principles, which you can put together as like the greater Sunnah, the kind of summary, you might say, of the way that the Prophet ﷺ wants us to live? So you can see that there's different ways of approaching this idea of Sunnah, and you could follow hadith, but sometimes that lands you into trouble, because some hadith aren't easy to make sense of. Okay, so then we looked at specifically Imam Malik, and we started with, remember, a couple of sessions ago, we started with the idea of tajdeed, and tajdeed is the idea that every so often Allah sends these individuals or a group of individuals who refresh the relevance of the religion, right? They protect the religion and they make it relevant for that time. And so at the time of Imam Malik, time was moving on since the time of the Prophet. There's a couple of generations that passed by, and there was this confusion about how do you define the Sunnah. There are all these hadith, there are different opinions going around. How do you distill those out to work out what the Sunnah is that is the way to follow? And in some ways, lots of people recording hadith, but the need of the age was to have a kind of rule book that will explain to you step by step, this is what the Prophet would do in this situation, or this is the right thing to do according to the teachings of Islam. Yeah, so that was Imam Malik's contribution. That, you know, there were lots of reciters of hadith. Imam Malik himself was a muhaddith, but his concern was the Muwatta, which is a rule book, so that before the Sunnah gets diluted and confused, that's captured essentially. And the way that Imam Malik did it is by saying that, well, the Sunnah is the way of the righteous people of Medina, right? So you can see, if we just have a look at the presentation here, that there are many companions. There are actually 1,000 companions, no, sorry, 10,000 companions who resided in Medina, because Medina was the capital of the Prophet ﷺ, but it was also the capital of the Khulafa Rashidun for another 25 years later after the Prophet passed away. So 10 years of the Prophet's life and a further 25 years afterwards, it was the capital. And it was the place of the mosque of the Prophet. It's where the Prophet is buried. So many companions had either moved there or they just stayed there, and they wanted to stay there. So the city was molded by the teachings of the Prophet. And so you had companions, then you had so many leading followers of the companions as well, and then followers of those. Now, Imam Malik had met lots of the followers of the companions, but he was actually taught by their followers, like Imam Zuhri. So one thing I hadn't mentioned last time, and it's just because I wasn't exposed to it actually, which is that there are quite prominent female companions. Well, we know about that, Aisha being foremost amongst them, radiallahu anha, but also students of hers as well. And there's one that I kind of inserted, retro inserted into the notes that you'll have with you, and that was Amra bint Abdul Rahman. So she was a student of Aisha, an avid student of hers, to the point of not only learning all her hadith and her fiqh, but came to the level of being a jurist, where a jurist is kind of on a different level. That's a person who's got an analytic kind of mind, and they can then solve problems that people come with, because individual hadith don't always match the problem. You need to have a broader understanding. Again, it's this idea of what the Sunnah is. You have to have a broader understanding of the hadith, the Quran, the principles of the Quran, and the process through which you would derive a ruling for a particular problem in a particular situation. So it's a very next level of learning and kind of accomplishment, you might say. Yeah, so Amra bint Abdul Rahman was one of these jurists of Medina. So much so that, where are we? Urwa, no, sorry, not Urwa. Zuhri, Imam Zuhri, said that Qasim bin Muhammad. So Qasim bin Muhammad is the grandson of Abu Bakr, and he was a tabi'un. Okay, and Imam Zuhri was his follower. And so Qasim said to him that, I see, my boy, that you're greedy for knowledge. Should I not inform you of the vessel of knowledge? Go and stick to Amra, for she was under the guardianship of Aisha. And then when Imam Zuhri went to her, he said, I came to her and I found her an ocean, and its water never goes. So she's like an ocean of knowledge and wisdom. And Imam Zuhri was one of the teachers of Imam Malik, one of his key teachers, actually. And he was also a well-known muhaddith as well. So that's Imam Malik. He put together this book called Muwatta, which actually started off with 10,000 hadith, and then he trimmed it until he cut it down to about 1,700 hadith, because he wasn't trying to compile hadith. He was trying to compile rulings. And, if one hadith would suffice, that's fine. So much so that sometimes he wouldn't even mention the chain of the hadith. He would just say that balaghna, it's reached us that the Prophet ﷺ used to do X, Y, or Z. Or even he would just mention companions. Or he would say things like, the practice or opinion I found the people practicing, or the agreed practice or opinion among us, which means amongst the scholars of Medina, who've been trained by the companions, who were trained by the Prophet. So you can see he used a number of expressions. We went through that last time. But the point was that Imam Malik made it clear that in order to understand what to do in a situation, you look at the practice of Medina, of the pious people and the learned people of Medina. Okay, so that was his definition of Sunnah. Because we're thinking, yes, we know it's important to follow the Sunnah. How do you define it? Yeah, that was the way that he defined it. So much so that, for instance, you've got this brilliant quote of Imam Ibn al-Qasim, who was a student of Imam Malik and was one of the kind of writers down of the Muwatta, and he taught it in Egypt. So Imam al-Qasim, essentially, to summarize that quote there, said that he was talking about a hadith, a particular hadith, and he says that the hadith has come down to us, as in like, yeah, we accept the hadith is there, and if it were accompanied by practice, which was also passed down to us from our predecessors, then it would be right to follow it. But in fact, it's like the other hadith, which are not accompanied by a practice. So in other words, not going to be followed because there's no practice, that's no tradition of Sunnah following it, right? Imam Malik himself would come across hadith and he would simply say, not denying their authenticity, but talking about the context, that you can't understand the context, right? And Imam Malik couldn't understand the context. So don't worry if we can't. Yeah? So Imam Malik would say things like, I don't know what the reality of this hadith is. Or he would say, we don't know what the proper explanation of it is. Or he'd say that this hadith has come down to us, but the practice is not in accordance with it. And last time we talked about examples where, so for instance, this hadith here we have, where it's in Muwatta, that Imam Malik would put the hadith in to show that the hadith is authentic. He knows about it. So don't come later and say, Malik did this, but didn't you know that the Prophet did that? So he would accept, I know this hadith, here it is, put it in Muwatta, and then explain that that's not the practice of the people of Medina. We don't do this, right? So for instance, there's that hadith about people doing Hajj for someone else. And he said, well, that's not the practice of the people of Medina. But he recognized that hadith is there, it's authentic, right? We have examples of other companions doing the same. So Abu Huraira famously narrated this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that a vessel in which a dog is licked has to be washed 7 times, and then the 8th time it should be rubbed with dust. But Abu Huraira only used to do it 3 times. So there's that kind of situation where you have a number of different hadith, and it's not always easy to make sense of them. But Imam Malik clarified the issue. Another thing that Imam Malik would do is he would always be looking at maslaha. So maslaha itself is like a kind of source of law, you might say, for Maliki jurists. And maslaha is basically looking at public welfare. So if something was, even if it was done by the Prophet, but Imam Malik thought that for posterity, you can't follow that exact ruling because it's just not in the welfare of the public. The example of that was the Prophet who married someone on the basis of a dowry, mahr, of some verse of the Quran or some surah of the Quran. And Malik said, no, there has to be a minimum monetary. His opinion is that there should be a minimum monetary value to the dowry of a quarter of a dinar. I don't know how that translates. Okay, let's move on now to another tremendous sheikh who was actually 15 years senior to Imam Malik. So you could say that we should actually start with Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmatullah alayh. The reason I didn't is because Imam Malik was in the city of the Prophet, so it felt appropriate to start with the city of the Prophet and the Sunnah as defined by the city of the Prophet and then move out to, you might say, peripheral areas. So Imam Abu Hanifa was of Persian origin, and it's said that his father had met Imam Ali, and Imam Ali had actually prayed for Abu Hanifa. Well, prayed for his father and his offspring, which includes Imam Abu Hanifa. Now, he was born in Kufa, which had become the capital of the Islamic Empire during the reign of Hazrat Ali, radiallahu anh. It was the capital only for 5 years, actually. But nonetheless, so what happened is that during his reign, he took the capital because there'd been a lot of rebellion and bloodshed in Medina, and he wanted to keep Medina sacrosanct. So he moved the capital to Iraq, and this place in Iraq called Kufa, which is not far from Baghdad, present-day Baghdad. So he moved there, and a number of prominent companions moved there. 1,000+ companions moved there. Most prominent amongst, as obviously after Imam Ali, but he only lived for 5 years whilst he was there. But most prominent was Abdullah ibn Masud, who the Prophet ﷺ had prayed for his learning, was well known as a leading jurist of the Sunna of the Prophet ﷺ. So he settled in Kufa. He taught many people, and his students were the teachers of Imam Abu Hanifa. So anyway, Imam Abu Hanifa was renowned from the very outset as a genius. He was an absolute genius, very, very sharp intellect. He started off as a businessman, actually. His family were a family of traders. He joined the family business. They sold cloths. He was a merchant. He made lots of money. He was very good at making money. Why do you think that was important? Imam Malik himself was also from a wealthy family. Why is that an important factor, do you think? Can I ask you to either pipe up with a contribution or type something in for me about why you think these scholars being wealthy was important? It might seem contradictory. Maybe a scholar should be poor, right? But why was it very helpful for them to be wealthy? Any thoughts at all? Right. So, right. Okay. So we have a couple of suggestions. One is that they then have the time to study. Another was that they might have state sponsorship. People would be more inclined to listen to them if they were wealthy. That's also an interesting point as well, maybe. One thing's for sure, that Imam Abu Hanifa was well turned out. He always liked to dress well. So perhaps that, adds to the attraction as well. He also liked good perfume too. Yeah, so good points. I think fundamentally, one answer is quite important. So state sponsorship was always on offer to scholars, and some took them. And I'm not going to necessarily criticize them for that, because a lot of good can come through that. But there's no doubt that if you're a state-sponsored scholar, you will be shackled by your role. Okay, and so wherever possible, scholars didn't like to do that, and Imam Malik didn't like it. Imam Abu Hanifa didn't like it. Didn't want to do that. But having wealth allowed them to remain independent, because Imam Abu Hanifa always remained a bit of a merchant, but he probably didn't need to do much of the trading. He could, because he had enough wealth that he could actually devote himself. And the same was true for Imam Malik, that having that money means that you don't actually have to go out and work day and night, 24/7. You can actually have a business that runs itself, or maybe you're just really good at making money. You just spend a few hours on business, and suddenly you've made enough money that you can come back and then study for a long time. And that's what Imam Abu Hanifa did. That he actually limited himself because he'd read a teaching was it a hadith? I don't know, Allah Alam, but a teaching that, you know, enough for a person is 4,000 dirhams, and so he would limit himself to that much, and anytime he made more money than that, he would just give it away. Yeah. So yeah, it's a really important factor, and it's important today. How many scholars are, you know, how many scholars are funded at the moment? Where are the charities, or where are the institutions that can support scholars, people of, you know, immense intellectual caliber and learning? You worry about how they're making ends meet, you know. And if they can't, then they have to put all their learning aside because they've got bills to pay, right? That's why it was actually extremely helpful. And also Abu Hanifa had the gift to just be able to make money very easily. But he was just super intelligent, mashallah. Okay. The other thing about him is that he was a very morally upright, decent person. One day, he was, you know, traveling along his way, and he bumped into Imam Sha'bi, who was one of the great scholars of Kufa. And he stopped him. So Imam Sha'bi had met 500 companions. This is, you know, his standing really as a tabi', as a successor. So he bumped into him and he said, "So where are you off to, young man?" And Imam Abu Hanifa said, "Well, I was going to such and such merchant to buy or sell or whatever." He said, "Well, I meant to ask, whose classes are you going to attend? Are you off to?" And he said, "Nobody." And Imam Sha'bi said that, "I see signs of intelligence in you, and you should go and sit in the company of learned men." So that struck Imam Abu Hanifa. It really struck him, and he went off thinking and decided that, you know what, I'll spend some more time on the deen. Now, being the kind of, you know, eloquent, super sharp type of person, the first type of people he went to were the theologians. So the theologians were kind of like philosophers. They like to take sort of relatively minor issues in the creed, or issues that hadn't even been thought much about by the companions. Because for them, what was Islam? Islam is a light. It's a way of life. It's a kind of spark of inspiration that's supposed to transform people's lives. That's what it did to them. Yeah, they were in Jahiliyyah, they were idolaters, and suddenly they get connected. They get this connection with God, and they just want to attach to that. They want to transform their lives, and they want to pass that message on and give it to other people, right? But the theologians were kind of like, you know, I wonder what is meant by such and such. You know, when the Prophet ﷺ went up to the highest heaven, did he see God? Could he see God? Is that possible? You know, and these sort of reflections, you know, reflecting about qadar, etc. So anyway, it's the kind of thing that would have appealed to Imam Abu Hanifa. He sat in those circles, the circles of kalam, as it's called, and thrived. He was, you know, chief debater. He was demolishing the opponents with the cunning of his arguments, the quality of his debate, the, you know, the eloquence of his tongue. And actually, he did a lot of good in terms of defending orthodoxy against confused sects. However, he did after a while become disillusioned with this, because he started to realize that actually, you know what, the companions never did any of this, and the students of the companions aren't doing this. Yeah, that there's a different way. The real day-to-day problems of the people are fiqh, are how do I do this? What do I, you know, what's the sunnah? How do I, you know, I've got this practical problem. What's the solution? What would the Prophet have done in this situation? What would he guide me to? So he started to sit with the learned people and the jurists, and it was particularly fiqh, because fiqh is also something that requires, you know, as I said, very sharp intellect to decipher and solve the kind of confusion between different hadith and different opinions, and, you know, find the best solution for a person with a particular problem in a particular time. So that's what he then started to do, and he sat with Hamad, and Hamad rahmatullah alayhi was a student of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who, as I mentioned, was blessed by the Prophet with a deep understanding of the faith. So he was his kind of like key teacher, with whom Imam Abu Hanifa then attached himself until the death of Hamad. And you often see that these students would, devote themselves, and this happened, probably even happens today. It certainly happened till very recently as well, that people would literally just go, wow, I adore this person. I just want to sit at their feet and I will just absorb everything they have to give me, and they will stay loyal to that teacher until they pass away, and then they move on. That's what Imam Abu Hanifa then did with Hamad. Then he went to Basra and studied with Qatada, who's also a famous tabi' successor. And at some point, he also went to Mecca and Medina and learnt there as well. He learnt under Ja'far as-Sadiq, who was one of the descendants of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was a teacher of Imam Malik as well. So Ja'far as-Sadiq was the teacher of both Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa. He also studied with a tabi' called Ata ibn Rabah as well. So he basically went around traveling and absorbing as much knowledge as he could from a number of places. So Ata ibn Abi Rabah, Abdullah ibn Umar himself used to say that, why do people come to me when Ata ibn Abi Rabah is there for them to go to? And he was a tabi'. So, Abdullah ibn Umar is a companion, and he's saying, why do you come to me when this person is still there, when Ata is here for them to go to for guidance, and Ata isn't even a companion. He was the next generation down. He's a student, but it was his depth of knowledge and his understanding. He also studied under Ikramah, who was a tutee of Abdullah ibn Abbas. And Abdullah ibn Abbas was also known for his phenomenal, not only knowledge, but also deep intellect as well, and ability to kind of see behind rulings, to the purpose of the rulings, and to interpret the Quran as well. Right. So his key student, who got all his learning, was Ikramah, and Imam Abu Hanifa went to learn under him also. So you can see that the background of Imam Abu Hanifa, he wasn't just staying in Kufa and learning from the scholars of Kufa, but he had a very broad base of learning. And of course, again, the wealth allowed him to travel and spend time wherever he wanted to, for as long as he wanted to, and learn. So, if we talk about his piety and intellect now, so Al-Layth says that the one character of Imam Abu Hanifa, although he's a phenomenal debater, but he says that I debated hundreds of men, but have never seen a man accept the truth as fast as Abu Hanifa. Right? Look at that. Learn from this, actually, that if he was wrong, he would just accept it. Yeah, he's not going to argue and defend his ego. Just defend his opinion, even if it doesn't actually make sense. That was his devotion to what's right. And we'll see that Imam Abu Hanifa was completely devoted to what is right. And Allah blessed him with a phenomenal intellect, which helped him to find that. Okay. Another thing that's amazing about Abu Hanifa is that he used to read the Quran through in one night, in his night prayers. And there are only 4 people that are ever known to have done that, and that's Hazrat Uthman, Tamim ad-Dari, Imam Abu Hanifa, and Imam Shafi'i, that they were able to do that, which is just, it's subhanAllah, it's something you cannot comprehend how how you could do that, but he did that. And Abu Hanifa was also famous for having the same wudu between Isha and Fajr. Wow, what does that mean? He didn't sleep between Isha and Fajr, and he just worshipped in that time. He was also known as the peg, and that's because he would spend the night, you know, well, there's a camera, upright, just upright through the night, reading obviously very long rakats, and he'd just stay there in that place in the mosque. There he was, subhanallah. Um, and in terms of like his learning, so it's said that he recited the whole Quran 7,000 times. So Imam Shafi'i said about the learning of Abu Hanifa that all the men of fiqh, in other words, the science of understanding Islam and understanding, finding solutions, all the men of fiqh are Abu Hanifa's children. And this is Imam Shafi'i, who to some extent didn't agree with some of the rulings of Abu Hanifa. We'll talk about that next week, inshallah. Now this is interesting. Okay, let's look at this. How did Imam Abu Hanifa practice? What was his way? So Abu Hanifa would sit in committee. He would have a committee of up to 30 people, learned people, people of hadith, of Arabic language, of tafsir, of qiyas. So these were people who were experts in their various fields. And then he would take an issue and he would ask them, okay, what do you think the solution should be from your knowledge? Give us the knowledge on this issue, give us your opinion. And he would ask everybody to contribute, debate, work things out collectively. Yeah. And once they'd come to a solution, he would then extrapolate that principle and test it out with different theoretical scenarios and say, well, okay, so what if the person had that property and then he died, who gets it then, or whatever, and go through lots and lots of what ifs, so that they actually became known as what ifers. And that was his, you could say it was his mission, that he saw it as, like Imam Malik, he's trying to say, let's capture, whilst we still have these people of immense learning around us who are so close to the time of the Prophet, let's capture the Sunnah of the Prophet the way that he understood the Sunnah to be, okay, before it disappears. And let's get all this learning out. And then his students, one of his students particularly, wrote all the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa down, as well as the opinions of some of the other scholars that were with Imam Abu Hanifa. So how do you think that's different to the style of Imam Malik? Can we have some thoughts about that? What's different there? Do we have some contributions on that? So, Imam Malik is famous for saying, I don't know. So that a lot of questions would come to him and he would say, I don't know. The majority, actually. How's this approach, actually? How's the approach different of Imam Abu Hanifa? So, okay, do you think that Imam Abu Hanifa would say, if somebody came to him with a question that he didn't have the answer to, what would Imam Abu Hanifa do? Would he say, I don't know? What do you think, from what you've learnt of him, what do you think he would do? Yeah. So Sul mentions that Malik just looked at the practice of Medina, but Abu Hanifa tried to work out the answers. So yeah, Rashid, that Imam Malik reached the conclusions that were explicitly evidenced. The evidence is already there, and he was just going to follow that. Whereas Abu Hanifa tried to extrapolate, and so he would find answers, but he might not. Even if he didn't have them himself, he had a committee, and that's an amazing thing, isn't it? And that's a lesson for us today as well. That what's the kind of conclusions you can come to in a committee are in some ways more sound than the kind of workings of an individual. And it's an amazing thing that he would do jurisprudence by committee. That's amazing. So if you came to him with a question, he might say, well, I don't know the answer to that, but wait a minute, tomorrow we're meeting, I'll put it to my team of phenomenal experts, and together we will come out with an answer. Yeah. And he would have muhaddithun there. So it's not like, sometimes people have this idea that Imam Hanifa is just kind of guessing and philosophizing, extrapolating from not having the hadith because he lives in Kufa, which is Iraq, miles away. But actually, people traveling back and forth. Imam Abu Hanifa himself had so much knowledge that he'd acquired directly from the students of companions and met companions like Anas bin Malik. So the knowledge was there, and the muhaddithun were devoted to studying hadith and finding the correct hadith, holding on to them. So that's there. But what he's doing is using that and then trying to draw conclusions with the help of his team, right? So it's an amazing thing. Now, what Imam Abu Hanifa, which is quite distinct from the approach of Imam Malik, said is that for him, Sunnah is the principle. So it's like the kind of overriding Sunnah, the greater Sunnah, or that comes through, first of all, the Quran. Okay, so if something is explicitly mentioned in the Quran, that's firm. Okay, and then hadith might find some specific exceptions at times through hadith, but the general rule still applies. Okay, and then if they're hadith, then it should be well-known hadith, or it should be lots of narrations, or lots of different hadith to demonstrate that principle. And then he would derive from all of this principles, and the principles he calls essentially the Sunnah, right? So that if there are individual hadith, those hadith, if they don't correlate with the broader, well-established principle, then they're put aside. And again, it's not about denying that hadith is authentic, that the Prophet said it. You're not denying that. You're just saying that doesn't correlate with the Sunnah, the wider teachings of Islam. Yeah. Can you see how that actually, these sort of approaches are very relevant to us today as well, because you will get thrown at you sometimes hadith that are perplexing, and sometimes the haters of Islam, those poor people, I mean, even the haters, you feel sorry for them sometimes, because they've got a distorted image of who the Prophet ﷺ was. They've got a distorted image of Islam, and they look at that and they think, that's horrible, I hate it, that's disgusting. And look at this, he did this, he said that, he said that. But that's because they're understanding the Prophet through individual hadith, whereas what the great Imams were doing is understanding the Sunnah, right? And that's what we need to go back to, is to recognize that, where there's a hadith that's problematic, it can't make sense to us, we park that and we say, well, there's lots of others that establish the principle, right? That's what Imam Abu Hanifa was doing. Okay, so let's have a look. So he would, for instance, if we go down to this, down these 5 points. So the first thing is that the general word, the am, which is a general principle. If there's a verse in the Quran that doesn't specify a specific context, then he defines that as a general principle that's got to be followed, right? And that establishes the principle. Okay, and that can also be based on, if lots of hadith together establish that point, then that also becomes a general principle. Okay, then he says that the use of general principle is a proposition from which legal reasoning is to proceed and the law to be extended. So that general principle is used as the basis for making lots of additional laws, right? The principle may be stated explicitly in the text, or it may be derived by jurists from a number of cases that are already settled by law. So these could be cases that were settled by the Prophet himself, that there are lots of different examples of him solving a problem, giving a bit of advice in slightly different contexts, and they all point towards that principle. Or there could be companions, or there could be students of the companions who regularly came out with the same kind of verdict. So then that gives you put them together and you get a principle from that. That's induction, as they say. It could be the opinion of a companion, from which the idea of a precedent is derived. And so that's then used as if a companion says it as well, and the principle's there, it strengthens the validity of that principle. So if you've derived a principle, not you as me or anything, but Abu Hanifa and his students, and then there are companions that also endorse it, that gives it additional strength, right? Of course, also ijma. So if there's a consensus, that also helps to define the principle. Okay, it makes it a completely unquestionable principle. And then the other thing that's really important is what we've already alluded to, and it's also the practice of Imam Malik, that the khabar wahid, these are the individual solitary hadith, yeah, which sometimes are the ones that, you know, are perplexing, right? So they're not accepted when they conflict with an unrestricted general principle. Yeah, so the only way that you could challenge a general principle is if there are lots of hadith that are well known, that all point to that direction. That sets up a new principle. Okay, so that's the kind of approach. And you know, Imam Abu Yusuf was a student, one of the leading students of Abu Hanifa. He actually clarified this position when somebody gave him a hadith, and he said that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ has many meanings and has different facets, and it requires explanations which no one comprehends or sees except him who God helps in understanding. So in other words, as Imam Malik sometimes said as well, that, you know, some hadith are just very difficult to understand the context of, and some people are blessed with that, and a lot of people just can't. Essentially, that's essentially what he's saying. Let's have a little look at these principles, or let's look at one example. So there is that hadith, from that hadith of Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, in which he heard the Prophet say that if a dog licked a utensil or vessel, then it has to be washed 7 times, and the 8th time with dust. There are others that say wash it with dust first and then 7 times. Okay, but there are also lots of hadith of different amounts of washing required for different animals, like cats and, you know, beasts, camels, etc. Because it's an issue, because water was scarce in Medina, right? So people want to know, well, okay, right, is it mucky? Does it make it filthy if this animal has licked the bowl, or if they've drunk from that water? You've got a bowl of a little bit of water, and an animal drinks from it, dog drinks from it. What do you do with that? Do you have to chuck the water away? That's a precious substance. We're going to then go to the well and hope there's some more water, etc. Right? So people really needed to. Nowadays, we just think, wash it, you put it in the dishwasher, what's the problem, right? We've got detergents, etc. But of course, you know, in those days they didn't exist, and water was scarce. Point being established. So the general principle that Imam Abu Hanifa came up with is that so he took all of the traditions as a whole and came up with a theory, you might say, yeah. And he said that the ruling of each of the animals is related to the permissibility of its flesh. So, for instance, if you can eat beef, then a cow drinks from a trough. You can drink from that as well, yeah, or you can use that trough, that water, for washing. And so if it's drunk from anything, its leftovers are fine for you. And that's the principle. So for instance, Ibn Rushd, who's a Maliki jurist from Cordoba, alas, from Cordoba. So he said, he thus used a part of the traditions and did not employ others. I mean, he used to use those out of them that did not use them, that did not use that did not conflict with the principles, and he did not use those that clashed with the principles. He supported this with the assertion that it was the opinion of Abu Huraira who had narrated the hadith. So in this particular instance, he's saying that, well, this is Abu Huraira's opinion. So Abu Huraira narrated that hadith. Remember, Abu Huraira himself only washed it 3 times. So Abu Huraira becomes the validator of that principle. You see, so that's actually like one of those 5 principles that we mentioned of the Hanafi approach. So the principles established through lots of hadith, and then there might be individual hadith that seem to contradict the principle. Those are parked because the general principle has been applied, and then a companion is also endorsing that principle as well. That's the way that the Hanafis worked. Imam Abu Hanifa, but remember, the Hanafis means not just Abu Hanifa-based students as well. Well, having said that, Abu Hanifa was the intellectual don there. So much so that they say that, for instance, Abu Hanifa would sit with his students and then he would argue against the ruling to the point where the companions all started following him. And then he would argue back again and they'd all follow. So he was very hard to argue against. SubhanAllah, some people have that gift, don't they? So Imam Abu Hanifa actually met Imam Malik as well. So, for instance, we have this point here. I'll just read out that in their meeting, Imam Malik disapproved Imam Abu Hanifa's view. Abu Hanifa replied that the circumstances in Iraq are different from Medina. Iraq is the capital of the caliphate, and every day there are new things being introduced, and they should be prepared to respond to them, while in Medina problems are fixed and limited. Yeah, so that's one argument that Abu Hanifa made, that, you know, because Malik didn't like the approach of like doing lots of what-ifing and hypothecating, you might say. But Abu Hanifa is explaining that it's a different situation. There's, of course, Iraq itself that was new to Islam, right? And lots of people from around Persia and Central Asia were coming towards Iraq with new customs, new ways of seeing things, new problems. And it required principles to be established that you could say, this is the message of Islam, these principles, the Sunna, that you could then extrapolate to solve all these new problems, right? And so he gave the example when he discussed with his students the situation of a woman whose husband traveled and was absent for so long that she thought he was dead, and hence she married another man. Suddenly the man returned. What should be done? Imam Malik wondered why they would ask about these things when they've not happened. But Hanifa said that in Iraq, where soldiers are sent on conquests, this situation could quite easily occur. And Imam Malik had to remain silent. I mean, there must be a deference also to the age that Hanifa is 15 years older than Imam Malik, but also that, you know, he's making a point. Oh yeah, the other thing that Abu Hanifa said, he says that Malik, the conquest during the reign of Umar al-Khattab distributed the companions all over the world. You say that in Medina there are 10,000 companions. In the last battle of the Prophet ﷺ, there were about 120,000 companions. So where are the rest? This is Abu Hanifa asking Malik. You can see the kind of depth of his, you know, analysis, right? So you can't deny that Umar al-Khattab anhu, sent the companions particularly to teach people in different countries, and that's what he did, right? He shipped them out. You have to go there, teach the people. And he talked about how there are lots of new philosophies coming along, and people needed to be equipped to deal with them, to counter them, and to know how to stay true to the Sunnah, the message of the Prophet, in the face of new ideas. So that is a kind of tajdeed that we're talking about, isn't it? So yeah, there we are. So Imam Malik once he said he wiped his sweat and he said that by Allah, Abu Hanifa made me sweat. By Allah, he is a true jurist. Yeah, a true person who understands the religion. I've never seen a man debating like that. By Allah, if he told you that this pillar was made of gold, he would convince you of it. The stone pillar in the mosque of the Prophet. Yeah, that's that was the kind of phenomenal intellect of Abu Hanifa, rahmatullah alayh. So what happened towards the end is that Imam Abu Hanifa was asked by Al-Mansur, happens to be the same person who tortured Imam Malik. Well, his governor tortured Imam Malik. So he asks Abu Hanifa to become the chief judge of the state. But you can imagine that as chief judge, you're endorsing, you then officially give the stamp of authority to the Khalif in all the things he does. And we know that Al-Mansur, for instance, shed a lot of blood. He killed a lot of his opponents when he came to power to stabilize his throne. And this is why Imam Malik wasn't happy about this, and he wasn't happy about the governor of Medina forcing people to pledge allegiance to him. That's why Imam Malik got flogged. So this same Khalif is now asking Hanifa to become Abu Hanifa to become the judge of the official judge, right? Chief Justice. Okay. As it is, his student did become, that Abu Yusuf did become the Chief Justice of Khalif Harun al-Rashid. Anyway, so Imam Abu Hanifa, he replies to Al-Mansur, and this is Abu Hanifa, to a T. He replies to him, and he says that that he's not fit for the post. And Al-Mansur, who had his own ideas and reasons for offering the post, lost his temper, accused Abu Hanifa of lying. Right. So Abu Hanifa says, "I'm not fit for this post." Al-Mansur makes a big mistake by accusing Abu Hanifa of lying. Checkmate. So he says, if I am lying, then my statement is doubly correct. How can you appoint a liar to the exalted post of the chief judge, the Qadi? To get it? Now he's stuck. Now Al-Mansur is stuck. Because he either accepts Abu Hanifa's initial proposition, or he accepts his own statement that he's lying. But if he's lying, if Al-Mansur is lying, then if Al-Mansur is correct in saying Abu Hanifa has lied, that proves Abu Hanifa is doubly unsuited to that role. Anyway, this completely incensed Al-Mansur, and he locked Abu Hanifa in prison and tortured him. Not being fed, cared for, and he actually died in prison. Some say that he was poisoned. Subhanallah. The students of Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa, there are two students who are very worthy of note. One of them is Abu Yusuf, who was the Chief Justice of the Abbasi Khalif Harun al-Rashid. Now, this is so important. Why do you think? What do you think the implications of that are? I'd like to have some thoughts on that. What's the implication of a Hanafi becoming the chief judge, as opposed to a student of Imam Malik, for instance? Remember, Al-Mansur and Harun al-Rashid both offered Imam Malik to make the Muwatta the official rule book that all the judges of the land will rule by, and he declined. And Imam Malik famously, he said that the companions have traveled through the world and have taught different people with their different ways, and they've become quite attached to them. And I wouldn't want the Muwatta to to cause that fitna, essentially, that division, right? So what's the what's the outcome of Abu Yusuf becoming the chief judge? And I'm offering Imam Malik's example as a contrast to that. Anyone? What will happen if he becomes the chief, if a Hanafi becomes the chief judge? No. No response. Okay. So the chief judge will also be setting. So do Hanafi rulings go towards Sharia? Yes. So that's pretty much the point, is that the Sharia obviously you have different opinions on what the Sharia is, and all the Imams had their own opinions. And they weren't just the four Imams that we're going to talk about, but Layth ibn Sa'ad was also a great Imam. Imam Zuhri was each of the Imams in those days were their own faqih, and they had their own madhab, essentially, you could say, right? But this is it. So yeah, Iman, you've said it as well, that this made the Hanafi position the official. So when the rules that you're going to abide by as a judge throughout the land are being set, they are being set according to Hanafi standards. Now, as it is, in some ways, remember Imam Hanifa's point that, look, there are so many new issues that we face in Iraq that you don't get in Medina. Medina is a very stable and static society. And we're thrashing out the principles that are going to equip you with being able to deal with all kinds of new situations. So actually, in many ways, a Hanafi judge was better suited, you might say, for being Chief Justice. And those principles would then allow them to then go off into the farthest reaches of the empire and still come out with rulings that are true to the Sunna of the Prophet, right? So much so that Abu Yusuf had principles laid down for international law and for tax collecting, which actually none of the Imams generally did, because they saw that as the rules, the domain of the rulers. And what kind of evolved over this time and subsequent times is that judgments that were carried out in sort of smaller towns and cities were in the hands of the faqihs of the madhab of the local Islamic school, right? And they just followed that. They went through their own madrasas and their own universities, and what they learned there is what they implemented in their lower courts, right? But when it came to the decisions of state, then the government kind of acted independently, often governed by some Islamic principles. So there might be a chief judge or whatever who's giving some principles for the government, but the government isn't being ruled by the nitty-gritty commands or the kind of judgments of that madhab, right? So the madhab kind of stayed away from politics, you might say, except for the time of Abu Yusuf, where he actually provided books and specific guidance based on Hanafi principles for rulers. Didn't happen afterwards very much at all. Okay, so that's a massive reason why 41% of the world at the moment is Hanafi, actually, because of that, because of Abu Yusuf saying yes. But also the Ottoman Caliphate as well was Hanafi, and it again used Hanafi principles wherever the Ottoman Empire spread to, like Bosnia, etc., became Hanafi as well. So you can see that was immensely influential. Ash-Shaybani, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, was a teacher of Imam Shafi'i. He also studied under Imam Malik. So he was a kind of a person that had a phenomenal familiarity with the different madhahib and different approaches, but he put together the Hanafi rule book and wrote essentially volumes and volumes of Hanafi fiqh and the principles of the Hanafi madhab. And he was a student. He was one of the people that was in that committee of 30, debating everything, and sometimes had his own opinions as well. But it all got transcribed straight after the time of Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa didn't write. Unlike Imam Malik, who actually wrote his own book, Abu Hanifa didn't, but his student Shaybani did. So that also was obviously an easy way of propagating that madhab, because it's all there in a book. Well, big book, shall we say. Khair, I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. Next time we will be talking about Imam Shafi'i. What I might do is actually cover Imam Shafi'i a little bit more briefly and Imam Ahmad, so that we can then start to try and bring the different madhabs together and kind of crystallize our understanding of the distinction between hadith and sunnah, which I think, is a tremendous tool that most Muslims don't have. They don't understand. They just aren't able to, have the confidence to kind of like approach hadith and sort of say, it's okay to park this one. Yeah. Any questions before we go? Okay. Anybody want to chat or ask any specific questions? No. Khair. Okay, we'll close it there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.